Good afternoon, everyone. If you can hear me from outside, please come in. This will be a great talk, I promise. So, a lot of the talks to this point have been fairly technical. I'm going to be taking a step back and looking kind of at more philosophical questions. Who should we trust? Who can we trust? Can we trust anyone, really? As Kat said, I'm a PhD student at UPenn, advised by Brett Hemingway-Falk. And I'm also a consultant at Silence Labs. Needless to say, these opinions are my own and not necessarily those of UPenn or Silence Labs. So, we live in a world where we have to trust a lot of entities. Whenever we put our money into a bank, we trust that the bank is not going to run away with our money. We trust that they're going to send our money to the people that we specify that they'll send it to. Whenever someone does some crime against us, we trust that we can pursue legal means to get adequate compensation. Increasingly, we're not just trusting traditional institutions, but we're trusting large tech companies. And we're trusting the applications that they develop in order to book our flights, book taxis, send messages to our loved ones. And as a result, we're also trusting them with a lot of sensitive information, our photos, our locations. So this is all well and good if they do what they're meant to do, but what if, say, these entities are nefarious? They have other things that they want to do with the information we provide them, or maybe they're not going to behave in the way that we hope and expect that they would behave. So, I'm going to ask you to consider the possibility, what if we didn't need to trust banks? What if you didn't need to trust big tech companies? What if, really, you didn't need to trust anyone? What if you only needed to trust the code? You only needed to trust math. So kind of close your eyes, imagine this world where you don't need to trust anything but math. Now stop, this world doesn't exist. It can't exist. So I'm going to show you a few reasons why this is just impossible. The first is, if we're going to have any complex communication protocol, we need to have any complex system, we need to have communication. And communication is not going to happen by Alice shouting across the room to Bob if Bob is in another country, and Alice doesn't have some portal that allows her to send carrier pigeons directly to Bob. Rather, Alice has some particular device that's running a particular operating system, and then she contacts that device, then contacts a particular internet service provider, which then needs to do a DNS lookup and contact a particular certificate authority, and then finally it accesses maybe some tier 1 internet backbone, reaches Bob's internet service provider. Bob is perhaps behind a firewall, and finally it reaches Bob. But even at this point, it's not really reaching Bob, it's reaching Bob's device, which again is a particular hardware running on a particular operating system. And finally, the message gets to Bob. So we can see that there are a lot of entities that you need to trust in the middle. You need to trust operating systems and hardware and network. And now you might say, well, we have encryption. We don't need to trust all of these entities. But encryption doesn't really get you that much. Sure, it does get you privacy from the network provider, provided you have a good PKI setup. But if the network provider is able to stop message, well, firstly, it doesn't give you any protection against the operating system or the hardware. But even if we're just looking at the network layer, it doesn't stop the network from delaying messages or possibly preventing messages from being delivered at all. And this is a real issue. A lot of MPC protocols work in the synchronous setting. So if an adversary is able to delay messages beyond a certain fixed period of time, they can completely mess up the protocol. And even if you are dealing with an asynchronous MPC protocol, if the adversary is able to stop messages getting delivered completely, then they can entirely mess up the MPC protocol. So the point of this slide is, unless you are willing to build your own internet infrastructure and write your own operating system, or at least proofread an existing operating system, and that operating system, of course, has to be written in machine code, or else you also have to trust your compiler, and you also want to build your computer by yourself, making all the chips by yourself, you're going to need to trust a lot of entities in the middle. There is no such thing as a trustless system. Inevitably, some of these entities have to be trusted to some degree. So you might say, okay, these are standard assumptions. Good, but they're good to bear in mind all the same. So this is an MPC talk, so I need to have a picture like this, where I show you some happy computers. And then I need to have a picture like this, where I reveal to you that two of these happy computers are actually demons and are controlled by the devil. But then I need to show you that actually, because we have some very cool MPC tricks, we're able to make it look like, to make this situation behave exactly the same as this situation. So as an academic cryptographer, I do this protocol, I present this, and then I'm like, okay, my job is done. But in the real, I'm like, okay, well, you know, we can assume that the adversary is not going to control this much. But really, in the real world, what is preventing Satan? If Satan is able to turn computers into demons, why isn't Satan able to turn all of the computers into demons? I might say as an academic, that's not my problem, but it's somebody's problem. Now you might say, well, I've been paying attention enough, I know about the full threshold setting. I'm able to divide my secret in different ways, so you would need to corrupt all end parties to learn the secret. Well, there are two problems with this. The first one, as we've kind of seen in some of the talks and the panels, a lot of the time, the person who owns the data doesn't want the overhead of needing to run a node themselves. It's just kind of technically beyond them or too much hassle. But the second problem is even if they do run one of those nodes, so say we do this situation, we split up the data n ways, you would need to corrupt all of the parties in order to learn the secret. Well, Satan can just tell the computers that he controls, to delete their shares, delete all their data. Now that secret is gone forever. And if that secret happens to correspond to someone's private key, then whatever cryptocurrency is behind those keys is also lost forever. So for certain applications, maybe this full threshold setting works, but for a lot of applications that we care about, we really don't want this number of demons around. So maybe though we're not in hell. Maybe we don't have to deal with these horns and tails. Maybe we just have to deal with eye patches. We're dealing with pirates. So our computers, they don't have a captain. They each do their own thing. Maybe they'll still kill you, but they're not going to do it because somebody told them to do it. They're just going to do it because they want gold. So this is a model that a lot of economists like. This model also makes for a lot of fun interview questions. Some people would say that this is the correct model for the blockchain space. I will not comment on that, but I will say that this model is generally not good for MPC. Why? Because these pirates might collude to make you walk the plank. So why wouldn't they collude to steal your secret data? It is probably, almost certainly, in their own selfish self-interest to collude, learn your secret data, and do something with that. So how do we deal with this? What is really going to prevent us having a lot of pirates and demons to deal with? How do we prevent this? More cryptography. No. The solution is not more cryptography. There are certain fundamental limits to what cryptography can and cannot do. And one of those is if I'm on a pirate ship, cryptography is not going to stop the pirates from abandoning me on a desert island. If I'm in hell, cryptography is not going to protect me that much. So what are the things that really are going to reduce the number of horns and eye patches in this picture? Why will these entities do the correct thing? Well, maybe they'll do it because it's the correct thing. This might, sound kind of old-fashioned, but no, it's a really important point. And it's a very good important point to bear in mind if you get to pick your node operators. If you get to choose who's running the nodes, try to choose nodes who are reliable entities, because the cryptography itself will not protect you. You also need enough of the entities to be doing the right thing. The great thing, of course, about MPC is we don't need every single one of them to be doing the right thing. We don't even need any particular one of them to be doing the right thing. But generally, they do need to be doing the right thing. And if they don't, the cryptography by itself is not going to save us. So I showed this picture in the first slide. This is Penn's coat of arms. And I've blown it up so you can see the motto, Leges sine moribus vene. Does anyone know Latin? No, me neither. But I looked this one up, and it means laws without morals is vanity. So I would say something similar about secure multi-party computation. MPC has not been translated into Latin before, so I took the liberties upon myself to do that. Computatum securitatis multi-parties sine moribus vainae. This is not to, so you need some baseline of morals for things to work. Laws, again, I've mentioned laws. Laws are also useful, even if some entities wouldn't do the right thing normally. If there are laws that will penalize them for doing the wrong thing, they are more likely to do the right thing. A kind of weaker form of this is if their friends will hate them for doing the wrong thing, even if they would have done the wrong thing normally, they will still often do the right thing. So I've talked about the nodes, I've talked about the connections between the nodes, but there's one significant entity or group of people that I haven't mentioned that are needed for this to work, that need to be trusted. And that group is us. So as a community of academic cryptographers, product developers, software developers, auditors, we increasingly need to be trusted. You might say, well, we don't need to be trusted. People can review the code themselves. It's open source. So Descartes would say something like this as well. So he said, I think, therefore I am, and he wanted all of his knowledge to be based on things that he could likewise prove himself. This was helpful in him developing math. It wasn't so helpful in his personal life. He was invited by the Queen of Sweden to be her private tutor. He accepted the position. She, unfortunately, as you can see in this picture, wasn't so interested in the math. Sweden is very cold. Sadly, Descartes contracted pneumonia. The Queen of Sweden sent her best doctor to Descartes to assist him, but he actually refused the doctor's help. This may seem unwise, but it's very consistent with his philosophy. If he wasn't able to verify the claims that the doctor was making himself, he wasn't willing to accept them. Eventually, he did accept the doctor's help, but at that point, it was very late, and sadly, he did die of pneumonia. So the moral from this is that in order to benefit from the knowledge that exists in a complex society, we need to be willing to accept expertise from other people. Most people know this. Most people are willing to, for instance, trust their doctors, trust pilots, etc. But this trust that has developed in these various professions did not come for free. It did not come automatically. So if we look at the medical profession, for instance, at the time of Hippocrates, there were not clear standards about what the norms should be in that profession. So what he did was he created the Hippocratic Oath, which was a baseline of moral principles that his students should abide by, and their students, etc., after them. So for instance, one of those principles is if someone wants you to poison someone else, don't do it. Now this might sound obvious, but apparently it needed to be stated. This was a significant first step in establishing baselines of ethics for the medical community. Another thing that he noticed was that this by itself probably wasn't going to be sufficient. There needed also to be laws to govern the medical community so that there would be punishment for bad doctors. And now we do have that, laws of medical malpractice. So let's turn it over to us now. We are a new community, a new professional community. Computer science in general and cryptography in general are very new, but specifically MPC being applied in the real world is an extremely new profession. So we're in a critical time when we get to decide what should the norms be, what should the standards be, what should the code of conducts be in our profession. There have been some steps towards this. So for instance, there are now good guidelines about what constitutes responsible disclosure. You don't exploit it, you don't put it on the internet. You first contact the organizations that are running the code that has this vulnerability. You give them 90 days to fix this vulnerability, and during that time you work with them to help them fix this vulnerability. But there are a lot of open questions. For instance, whenever this happens, should the person who found the flaw be compensated, and how much, and by whom? There are lots of open questions in the review process. Of course, we have a review process in academia. Some people have commented earlier today that sometimes that doesn't work as well as we would like. So given the increased stakes that now exist, given the sheer amount of money that is being protected by these protocols, I think we need to re-examine how we review code, how we review protocols to ensure that they're safe. So, I hope I've left you with more questions than answers, but I hope I've left you with the right questions. So the right question is not, how do we completely eliminate trust? That is impossible. I hope I've convinced you of that. Rather, the right question we should be asking as a community is, how do we develop norms? How do we develop standards? How do we develop a code of conduct within our profession so that we can operate at a high standard? How can we become worthy of the public's trust in us? Thank you.